the research that you can do is better than the perfect ideal research that you can't get to.
What is the right balance between the qualitative versus quantitative results that you get?
The balance maybe is less about sort of how much of anything gets done and more about like how do you set up the synergy between those different kinds of approaches. So those people are talking to each other, so they know a little bit about what each other knows. They kind of approach problems together, that they're not kind of competing. If there's not a research leader, then sort of the esteem or the dynamic between people doing research and people that are acting on research is there's sort of an imbalance in the power dynamic there. It does make it sort of weird to talk about the value we bring when it's not always kind of apparent to people because they fully internalize it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lyoshin podcast. Today's guest is Steve Portigal. He's a user research consultant and speaker and author and a host of Dollars to Donuts podcast. And for the last 20 years, Steve been working with different organizations to help them gain insights to their users' behaviors, beliefs, attitudes, to design and build great products that are successful and delight their users. And today I invited Steve to talk about user research in general and some of the methods and techniques and challenges, all about that. Welcome, Steve. Nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Nice to be.
So why don't we start from the beginning and try to explain the role and importance of user research in the product management, product development world?
Yeah, I think about user research as being, a way of getting the information, finding out what we don't know. Sometimes we don't know that we don't know it, to make the decisions that we have to make. And they could be about anything, really, like the product strategy, what market to serve with what product, what the product should be. So you can think about these kinds of questions that we might need to answer at different points in a product development process, like, what are people doing right now in some area that we want to be involved or serve? Or how do they understand it? How do they think and talk about it? What current solutions do they have? How are those solutions working for them or not? What gaps are there in the current solutions that people have? Or if we have a concept or an idea of what we think we want to do, like we're not just looking at the need, we're looking at some idea, we already have some hypothesis. How would that idea be received? How is that concept understood? What would people expect from that concept in order for it to be successful for them? And then even further down, I think in the process, when we have a thing that we are making, we have some version of it. So it's an alpha, it's a prototype, it's a wireframe, whatever that is. Sometimes we want to understand how well can people use this? Does this solve their problem? And even when we've got something out in the market, I think there's still these questions, right? How does our current solution succeed or fail for people? And so these are all questions that we can get answers to with research that then drive our decisions about, what are we going to make? What are we going to build? How are we going to choose to respond to these opportunities or challenges kind of with the people that we want to be our customers?
Yeah, okay. I understand. And then I saw you mentioning something in your profile about working with leaders and building mature user research practices. So what does it really mean from your point of view to have mature user research practices?
Yeah, and I think mature is a relative term. I don't think there's any absolute mature, but it's really about growing and building in ways that are relevant to the organization. And so there are, attributes of maturity that you could look at, like, what's the skill level of people doing research that we have, or what's the infrastructure that we have for doing research, or processes in place? How is research being documented or socialized so it can be used to get to the people that need that information to make decisions? What kinds of methods are we doing? What kinds of questions are we asking? Like I just listed before, what problems people have versus how usable is our prototype. Well, those are different kinds of questions. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can think about maturity as being, any of those kind of more and better. It doesn't mean that everyone needs to, it's not a purity test. Everybody must be perfect at everything. But it's, I think, a lens of looking at, yeah, we're doing a lot of things. Some things we're doing well, some things we're doing not as well. What do we want to, what does better look like? So in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
what does more mature look like? I almost want to flip that around and like, yeah, it's the question that everyone has to ask. Like within these kinds of attributes, where do you see the opportunities? So, I might have an opinion for a specific organization, but also they have to really be excited and like, this is kind of negative, but feel the pain of what they haven't, where they aren't as mature as they could be.
So I guess it includes both the leadership and the organizational culture, how they do things in general, and also the actual teams that work day to day, and they include or use those practices every day to kind of figure out what to do and what will be better for users, right?
Yeah, that's great. Right? Some organizations don't have leadership specifically for researchers. Some organizations
Mm-hmm.
do and some don't. So even just from a, not even the quality of leadership, but just it's going to be a different kind of organization if research is led as a peer with engineering, design, marketing, product management, and so on. That's objectively, I think, a more mature organization if you have leadership that can advocate for the function and the collaboration at a peer level with other disciplines versus, yes, we have leadership and we have corporate leadership, but we don't have leadership for user research specifically.
Yeah, I know that many organizations missing that, and they either hire somebody from outside temporarily to do a very small thing, um, or they just leverage product managers to do that, and they expect product managers to be experts in this. so, so for the organizations who don't have that leadership buy-in, if you will, how do you convince them? How do you promote this idea to start these practices?
I mean, I think it's the old cliche about, and I'm sorry, I can't cite who actually said this, but right, no one wants a quarter-inch drill bit. They want a quarter-inch hole. And in
Yeah,
fact, right, no one wants a quarter-inch hole. They want to hang a picture. And in fact,
right.
no one wants to hang a picture. They want to, have a home that displays their art. Whatever. I think you could keep going up and up and up. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think as like a research expert, enthusiast, nerd, or whatever I am, I think it's easy for me, and I think people like me to be focused on the drill bit, right? Oh, you need to be doing this method. Oh, you need research. And I think that's a trap that research advocates, and I'll own that too, kind of fall into. That we see the lack of sort of observable behaviors and see that as the gap. I don't think that's very persuasive, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Why does somebody else have to care about that? But
Mm-hmm.
what I said at the beginning about all the decisions that need to be made and that we need to reduce risk and feel more confident or gain new ideas. I think that's a more compelling argument for like what research can bring. So I think to help people see the value of research, one way is to like not sell research. Research is a means to an end, and so selling, and, and I don't, when I say sell, I don't mean convince someone to do a thing they don't want to. I don't mean that. I mean work with them, discover what's important to them, collaborate and ask questions around the questions that people have. When I talk to people that are research leaders, they're not doing sort of, when they talk about influence and buy-in, they talk about asking questions. They talk about understanding what people's gaps are and what people's questions are. Because for sure, right, if you're someone in an organization who has to make decisions and make products and make things for customers and users, of course you have questions. That's part of the job. And so I think there can be sort of a respectful question and answer sort of exchange to say, what do you need to know? What decisions do you have to make? What information would help with those decisions? Have you thought about this information over here? Like, what else do we already have that can answer your question? And, then maybe proposing, well, given that, here are some ways that we could start to get that information. So yeah, I think it's a dialogue, not trying to make somebody do something they don't want to do. So yeah, meeting people where they're at, I think is these questions, right? It's not the drill bit. It's here's the home with decorative art in it that we want to have. So trying to push towards that conversation, I think is one way of sort of starting that conversation. And I think another thing that really pays off is giving people a taste, right? Like this is, I think if you don't know what it's like to have information that, that in fact, and this, I hope this doesn't come off too arrogant, that and I don't mean you, I mean the generic you couldn't get yourself. Like this is what, the more experience you have, the more ability you have to get something that's complex, elusive, nuanced, and meaningful. And not everyone can do that. And so I think sometimes if there's an uncertainty or even a rejection of research as a solution, part of that is based on a naive understanding of what is it we're even talking about here? What is this thing? And so sometimes we have to help people have a taste, have an experience, pick something and go do it and be able to come back and say, hey, we understand this in a richer way. And we have a different way of thinking and talking about the risk or the opportunity or the decisions. And so, you don't have to get people to always believe in research now and forever, but you can get them to try it out and see what it's like and let that experience kind of guide them. So yeah, I don't need to change people's minds, but I do need to understand where they're at and then give them a chance to kind of experience something that, I mean, there's no reason to assume that everyone's done this before in kind of a way that's going to be meaningful for them. So, giving them a chance to experience that, I think can be impactful for people.
Yeah, that could be something to try if there is no buy-in yet, or if people are just skeptical about it. So then, what about some of the techniques that people can start with or can start using?
Yeah, there are so many techniques for research. There's a great article by Christian Rohr. It's called When to Use Which User Experience Research Method. It's kind of a long title. And there's a lot of description there of different methods and when to use them. And it's not like that article is the complete canonical set of every method. I think methods vary; they get mixed together, and we make up new ones all the time as kind of ways to get at things. I think there's just some sort of fundamentals like watching people do something. So that's not really a method, but maybe it's sort of a mindset to a technique, right? So what are people doing? Can we watch them do it? And then there's things like asking people just asking people some questions. What do you do? How do you do it? Why do you do it that way? What works? What doesn't work? And then there's things like asking people to try things. Here's a thing that we have. Here's a thing that we're making. Here's a thing that our competitor makes. Try this and tell us what it's like. What do you see? And so they're all kind of going to people and asking questions. We could get more granular and say like, oh, there's a survey and there's a usability test. I'm trying to sort of think about techniques as like big categories.
Yeah.
And let's not get hung up on like, oh, you use this tool to roll out this kind of survey with an N of this, and then you analyze it that way, right? There's just so much specificity about all of that. But you can think about, can we ask questions verbally? Can we write up some questions and send them to people? Can we have them show us things? And then you want to think about, what are your goals? What do you want to learn? Is this the right way to do it? Um, and so I think with more experience, or if you look at articles like Christian Rohr's article, you start to see like, okay, if we want to understand, why people aren't really engaged with something, maybe a survey is not the best way to do it, because we're trying to understand. We don't know the set of things we're trying to understand. If we know already from other data that we have that it's something that we're curious about is a choice between like three different paths. Well, that might be a great thing for a survey, because we can put those three paths in front of people, describe them in a certain way, and then ask them to rank them or evaluate them or choose or whatever that's going to be. So with a little more experience, you start to understand, all right, the nature of our question sort of drives what kind of technique we want to use. And then I think there's just also what's accessible to us. If we're a less mature organization, we might only know how to run a survey. We might only have the infrastructure to run a survey. We don't know how to do some other thing. We don't know how to make a working prototype and put in front of people, or the kind of data it would take to simulate a really good experience is kind of beyond us. More experienced people know how to like rig up a test to do that, but I think you kind of got to go out with what you've got. So just being realistic about what you can pull off. So I think, we can be critical of like, oh, this organization, all they do is surveys. And that's not a great state to be in perpetually, as an example. But if all you can do is surveys for whatever, skill or infrastructure or maturity reason, I'd love to see those organizations doing surveys, right? That's the research that you can do is better than the perfect ideal research that you can't get to. And so if we're always learning, we're always trying, we're always growing, we still have to be realistic about like where are we at today.
Yeah. While you were talking, I had this example in my head. It's not so much about like discovering something new or solving a problem. It is a solving a problem. So we had this instance in one of my jobs from the past where we couldn't figure out why the hardware devices don't link up with each other, why they don't work in a certain facility where we had a whole bunch of users. And then we had to get on the site and talk to them and experience that problem to realize that there were so many people in this area having cellular and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and all sorts of signals messing with each other that we couldn't properly find and identify our devices. It was a very weird situation. We could be spending years probably trying to figure out this problem, but we had to go outside there, talk to people, experience their problem, and then figure it out. It's just example, kind of like a bug troubleshooting, I would say. But still, it gives an idea, I think, to people that you're not limited to surveys, right? You can get out, talk to them, and probably you should, and ask all kind of questions. Pretend you're kind of like a dumb person, unexperienced person. You don't
Yeah.
know anything. Just
Yeah.
show me your job.
Yeah. Right. In that case, sort of right, we create our own limits. Well, we can't go on site, and like, well, why can't you? Oh, so your team
Yeah.
realized that was an artificial constraint, and that the current methods weren't solving the problem. So you were a little creative, and you broke
Hmm.
down your own internally created, restrictions on how to approach a problem. And that was the way to get to the answer. That's a great
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. So then, like you mentioned already, we have a bunch of different methods and techniques to do this. Are there specific like types of problems maybe, or types of situations when you can use one versus another and get much better outcome of it or better insights?
I almost want to say we should be combining methods because there's no sort of any interesting situation has multiple facets to it. I mean, for sure. Well, I'm going to assume in that example that you gave that you didn't get a bug report and like get in the car. You, you whatever technical things you could do remotely. You ask people to reset things. You ask them to,
Mm-hmm.
you got your engineers together and you reviewed the map of the installation. Like you did a bunch of things.
Right.
And then, you reached a point where like, okay, now we need to kind of go there. And I think that's even what happens in user research. Like we have some data point, like, oh, we're getting a bunch of, service calls, or our customer satisfaction survey is changed since last year. Well, so that's research with a certain method. It gives you some data, and then you say, well, we need to understand why that is. Well, let's send a follow up survey because we have
Mm-hmm.
that's already allocated, and it answers some questions and it raises other questions. So then we say, well, let's have some let's do some remote interviews with a few people, and then that identifies what the root cause of this lower customer satisfaction is. But then someone says, well, okay, well, how prevalent is that? We talked to 8 people for these interviews. How prevalent is that? All right, we're going to add a question to the next quarter survey that's now very focused, that takes the output of the interviews and says, okay, you know, are any of the following true for your organization? We have this problem, we have this setup. And so now we understand we had weak signals at the beginning. We investigated with one method to get at, like, tell me a story about what's going on. Now I understand what that is, and of course why it didn't show up on our survey. And then we iterate our survey, and we get we understand the spread or the prevalence of that kind of issue. So that, I think there are sort of, you can make up problems where it's just we have a question, we use a method, and then we go and act on it. But it seems like this stuff often happens kind of in a more longitudinal way. Um, sometimes we understand the problem. Maybe we do, a small set of interviews. We understand what the problem is. It's some labeling that's inconsistent, and so maybe the next thing that we do is change our design. But we might want to do a usability test of that change to make sure before we launch it, or we might launch it and then do a follow-up survey to see, did that solve the problem? So you're kind of taking different points and asking different questions. In other words, using different kind of methods along the way. So maybe in that kind of narrative, sort of the best method is, it kind of is dependent on like, what was the previous method that you used. Like this thing comes up about should you do like surveys versus interviews, and which one should you do first? If we have certain kind of problem, and I think there will be people that say, oh, you always start with X, but I feel like in my work, the problem that I get brought is sometimes we did this research and we need more information. Like, we saw this behavior, but now we need to understand why. And we need to understand what these behaviors are, so then we can go and measure or count them. So, the problems that come to me are sometimes, method A is going to feed into method B, or sometimes it's method B is going to feed into method C. I don't see that that there's sort of a standard pattern there. Other people may disagree with me, but I don't know. I'm kind of avoiding the like best method for best problem, because I think it's more about ongoing knowledge and ongoing decision making, and reducing risk. Right? I could do a bunch of interviews, understand that that the labeling is inconsistent. Do we feel confident that if we change the labeling, that's really the problem? Depends on everything, right? I mean, that depends on sort of how you went about doing that research. And yes, I might be guilty of like inventing more need for more methods and so on. I think, let's say we learn that the labeling is inconsistent and we recommend some design changes. And we might say, like, it would be great to do a validation before we launch that to everybody, but we don't have bandwidth. So we're acceptable. That risk is acceptable to us. So yes, I can propose lots and lots of research and ways that research feeds into each other. And we can choose not to do it. And we can just say to ourselves, like, yeah, I'm confident, or if we're wrong, the risk is low, or if we're wrong, we're going to catch it in the next round. I mean, there's lots of ways to kind of think through it. I don't know. I've kind of reframed your question a bit. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I like this combination of different methods and trying what works best. You may have different tools available to you. You may have different people reacting or responding differently to different methods. I like this idea, so people can try multiple things and see what works for them. So their product may be not best to send out surveys or send out something else, right? So, okay. And then how can we balance, or what is the right balance between the qualitative versus quantitative results that you get?
Right. I think sometimes this depends on organizational culture and kind of what we say as a team that we believe in. I think sometimes we are overwhelmed with quantitative information because we have so many sources for getting it. And I keep mentioning surveys, but I think there are more passive types of quantitative information. So whatever kind of logging, whatever kind of data warehousing for big data stuff that we have, it's kind of coming to us anyway, right? We've built infrastructure, and so we have all that. I think in tech, I think we're sort of just given the nature of technology. I think we have a lot of quant data and like really smart people that can kind of make sense of it. And I feel like sort of qualitative data, and maybe this is just my own bias, but I feel like we have to kind of keep putting our hand up and saying, like, hey, like, we can help, right? We can answer different kinds of questions here. And I think in the olden days, you might have, and hopefully I'm not saying it this way, quant and qual are sometimes, in opposition. But I think the, experienced people with either of those skill sets love what the other can bring. It's just like what I was saying about different kind of methods, right? These are folks that are good with certain kinds of tools. And so, if you have an organization with both, if they can get together and tackle a problem, or if they can go to each other and say, like, hey, here's what we're seeing this way. Do you have anything over here that can kind of enhance our story or clarify? I really want to see it as a collaboration. So I don't know, the balance maybe is less about sort of how much of anything gets done and more about I'll just use the cliched word synergy. Like, how do you set up the synergy between those different kinds of approaches? So those people are talking to each other, so they know a little bit about what each other knows. They kind of approach problems together, that they're not kind of competing. And anytime I've worked with data scientists or people like that, like, I think that's not my domain, and I think we tend to want to treat quantitative information as sort of pure scientific, absolute, sort of rigorous. We use these kind of words with bias, but if you watch like a really great data person, it's extremely creative. They're trying to find stories and try out different patterns and see what emerges, see what creates contrast, and hypothesize what does that data tell us? What's the story there? What's behind? What's really happening that's going to give us this kind of signal? And it's not absolute and perfect. It is subjective and interpretive and creative. And if you think of sort of data science that way, even though it has the word science in it, if you think about the enormous creative and interpretive power and skill that those folks have, I think they are much more alike, qualitative research people, than they are different. Um, so I don't know. It's just my version of like, I think we can all get along. I think we can all we can find balance kind of in our collaboration, as opposed to
Yeah.
kind of, have it be a competition or one is better than the other.
Yeah, I like it when you said the synergy of it, and one can supplement the other one. Like if you have a survey with a bunch of results that don't make sense or still have a bunch of questions, right? Go talk to those people and figure out why they answered that. So, yeah, I like
Love it.
that. So, what are some of the challenges in user research?
Right. You kind of alluded to one of them, right? I think, right, buy-in is just a big, big, big category. Influence, impact. These are sort of buzzwords that get thrown around. Um, like I think research is such an interesting category of thing. Like it reminds me, I guess, of like acting or film directing. These are things you're not supposed to notice, right? If you go see a film, one version says like if you go see a film and you say, "Oh, the editing was really good," in some respects, that's a failure of the editing. Like you noticed it. You're supposed to notice the great story, and so on, and not think about the acting. I mean, I think right, the more enthusiastic you are about something, the more you are interested in what lies behind it. But I think research is sometimes like that. It's the if we do some research and we find out something that unlocks the problem. Oh, people are using multiple devices and they have really noisy signal environments, so no wonder they weren't getting kind of the performance out of our devices. That's kind of a research story. But when the engineering team goes and like ups the power signal on the radios and the devices and solves the problem, like that's a successful engineering outcome. And so that story may be, hey, look at the improvements our engineers made to the RF performance of our device. Like that's great. That's a big improvement to the product. Um, and it's sort of a more elusive story to say, hey, our field team uncovered what the breakdown was and helped prioritize what the solve was going to be for the RF engineers. Like that's like the directing. Like you really maybe you don't notice that. So, you know, if you want to have research be something that people care about, value, that they take seriously when there's information, sometimes that's at odds with being the editing. With being because you don't get attribution. Um, and I think this goes back to like if there's not a research leader, then sort of the esteem or the dynamic between people doing research and people that are acting on research is there's sort of an imbalance in the power dynamic there. Um, so I think the power of a research leader to kind of advocate for research and kind of remind people, hey, like here's what we did and here's how you acted on it. Because I don't think people should be remembering that. They should be excited about the changes in the radio and the hardware and like the improvements to the product. So I think this is like
Mhm.
a weird circle that gets created where, people that do research, that advocate for it, that believe in it, that know what its value is, don't always get kind of noticed because it's it's what we're helping somebody else do. And if you
Mhm.
talk to researchers, like we go into that field because we like that's attractive to us. It's a helping profession. We like to help people come up with things on their own. And in that example that you told that I keep referencing and I'm adding fictitious details about RF or whatever, but
Mhm.
like we're in the business of putting new ideas out there, like changing how people think, changing what words they use. They shouldn't be giving us attribution. They should be embodying and owning those ideas and new ways of thinking. And, I think we do research and we empower people, we give them tools and frameworks to think and act differently, kind of going forward. And so they're not going to say, like, oh, Steve told me to call it this and this instead of this and that. And now I think like that should just be, embedded in them kind of going forward. So do they think, oh, Steve was really influential and like his research was really important? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I think in the best possible scenario, yes, we work with people that are generous with their credit and they remember learning moments. But I think so much of it happens, right? I mean, that's that whole thing about, you want to have influence. You give somebody an idea and help them think that it was their idea, and that's not even a trick, right? You're collaborating, and they sometimes you don't tell them the answer. You give them the information, and then they generate the answer because that has much more stickiness. That has much more impact.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This is, I guess, I'm giving kind of a long answer. Like there are, I'm sure we could point to like tactical challenges and financial challenges and timing challenges and all that. But I think the sort of the invisible attribution when we are the most successful is like on one hand, I wouldn't have it any other way because it lets me work in the way I want to work with people that are going to go and do things. Like I want them to do things and I want to give them something that'll help them do things. Like that's the dynamic I like to have in my work. That's why I have this profession. But it does make it sort of weird to talk about the value we bring when it's not always kind of apparent to people because they fully
Mhm.
internalize it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes also there could be conflicts, right? Because you have your leaders or stakeholders who want one thing for the product to do, but then you go do research and users tell you something else. And there's a conflict then. And we know that in product management, it's better to have that both are matching. So how do you go about conflicts like that as a user researcher?
There was someone that I talked to a few years ago who said when she presents research, she says, the data is telling us.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and that's all about not owning if it's a disagreement with two ends to it, not putting herself on the other end and sort of
Mhm.
taking on the role of like, I want to make this feature, but users don't want that feature. We shouldn't do it. Like she sidesteps that dialogue and gives them the information. In some ways, it's like it sounds almost passive, but I think she was kind of saying, look, people are grown-ups and they can make their own decisions. So we give them what they need. The data tells us this. Um, I think it really depends on what the finding is. I think we shouldn't go build everything that users tell us, um, literally. And then research doesn't simply report what users tell us. Research has conclusions and inferences and recommendations and so on. I think we're in the business of starting a discussion. And I mean, I think sometimes if I've had the opportunity to meet with people and understand their hypotheses or their plans or their expectations, I think like I gave this presentation a little while ago called it relates to your question. It's this talk was called "We Already Knew That" or "What to Do When You Hear We Already Knew That." It's not about it. There are ways that when you share research, your research gets rejected, and so yeah, that's not what we want to do. And your example, I think, is one of them. We already knew that. I think is a standard response that anyone that's delivered research has kind of heard. And there's a lot of reasons that you hear that. Um, but I think, understanding when you meet with people before you do research, like what is it that you assume? What are your hypotheses? What are your plans? And I think we have a lot of choices in how we share research. So I think we can be very directive and conclusive and say users want X or we should build X. If we know that someone's plan is to do Q, um, I think we can say things from the research that are like, um, if you want to do Q, here's the barriers you're going to have to overcome. Q, as you've described it, is not significantly differentiated from our competitor's product or from our previous product. There isn't a gap in the market for a different price point. They assume that it's going to be made by the Pepsi Corporation and not the Coca-Cola Corporation. Whatever thing the research tells us, I feel like those are sort of design opportunities or barriers to overcome. And I don't think the research has to say, like, it's just not a binary, right? I don't know that we have to contradict what the sort of stakeholders' goals are. We can say, if you want to do this, you're going to have to overcome these things. And hey, those are great questions to start doing a design brainstorm on right now. Like, how might we, put this product out so that it has a clear differentiation among our portfolio? Whatever that is that we've understood from the research. And again, I'm not saying it. The data is telling us that. The stakeholder can say, like, I don't care. That risk is not meaningful to me, or I've already know how to solve that. Whatever. I think we can understand the issues. And so, like, I think for sure the scenario you're describing is one that we can let ourselves feel. But I think just like the quant versus qual, I think we can choose to treat those as collaborations and treat those as, here's how the research that I've done can help you find the opportunity. And for sure, right? You do research and someone says like, oh, I'm not going to go ahead and make the product. I think sometimes you have that attribution thing as well. Like I can't think of being in a presentation where I have pointed out how research uncovered the challenges to the current path. I don't think anyone goes like, "Ooh, I guess we're not going to do it then." But what happens is, months and years later, they still haven't done it. And so you don't get those sort of moments where like, see, I told you this was wrong. You're right. This was wrong. We're not going to do it. I don't think it kind of happens that way. But, if it's a bad idea and you have the data to show that it's a bad idea and like not good for the company, I think sometimes the energy kind of goes out later and yeah, it's not your idea not to do it. It's their idea not to do it. You've kind of given them, that info that they can use to do that.
Yeah, I like this technique, if you will, to kind of put yourself as a middleman and say the data show us, because many times people may think, or bosses may think like, oh, you didn't do your job properly, or it doesn't align with our business. Don't you know what we do here in this business? Go figure it out, and kind of making people maybe try to do the research that matches what they want, not really what people want, who will use this product. So that's what I wanted to get your insight on, because I see this happening. It happened to me many times in the past. So that's kind of how it goes. So what are some of the things that may be happening in the industry that you see, like new trends or new, great ideas in terms of, or that can help user research or anything like that people maybe just starting using?
I sort of reference this term obliquely. It's a term from Kate Towsey, who's a leader in research operations. Has just published a new book about it and has been, helping to build that field out for a number of years. And she introduced the term maybe 5 years ago or so. The term is people who do research, PWDR. And I think there are lots of kinds of research, and we sort of talked about it, a few different points in this conversation. And when we say research, we're not always talking about the same thing. But there's also this thing about who are the people doing this research, whatever kind of research it is. Kate kind of says there's researchers and there's people who do research, and there's probably some subtleties if you want to get complicated. There are kind of research adjacent people. Sometimes in orgs, those are like the designers. The designers are kind of UX people there. And you've got some PMs who are like, we're researchers. We do research. That's kind of their skill set. It varies by individual. But when we talk about an organization doing research, there's this, I think ongoing evolution. And sometimes it's kind of like, we're tearing our hair out about who does research, about, is it people who do research? Is it researchers? Who do we have on our staff? The buzzword for this in the UX research world is democratization. It's like such a heated term that it gets called the D word now, like it's as a bad word. Um, and I think the reality is, like, in every organization, you have lots of people talking to users, talking to customers, getting feedback. And is that research or not? Yeah, research is a big term. Um, and so if we've sort of talked about maturity as well. I think, an evolution of maturity is some clarity around who does what kind of research and what do they need to kind of be empowered. So this is, it's not a new issue, but it feels like the last few years it's really become an issue that gets talked about. Does this mean organizations can get away with fewer researchers or lower quality research? Like, I think these are the anxieties that it produces. If you don't have researchers, you don't have any guidance on quality. I mean, I think that can be true. It doesn't have to be true. But, if we're sort of talking about maturity, how do you set up an organization to have the right people with the right skills doing the right level of kind of quality of research to solve, get the information the organization needs? So this issue of democratization is kind of a big ongoing one, as organizations over the last couple of years, I guess, have really reduced their staffing levels in the tech industry for sure. And I think every profession feels like, oh, we're the hardest ones hit it all, overall. It's right. It's messed up. There are much smaller teams. They're being asked to do more with less. There's lots of people that don't have jobs because they were in these organizations. I think everyone feels like they're sort of under siege and maybe in competition. So I think there's just this sort of soul searching among not just researchers, but among people that need this data and that are actively involved in kind of going out and getting this data. So I think that is just right. It's a multi-headed thing. There's sort of economics and employment issues, and financial aspects and staffing aspects and industry trends, and sort of the power jockeying. And so, I think it's just I think the thing to consider is, yeah, what do we mean by research? Who are the people doing the research, and how do we give them in our organization kind of what they need to be able to successfully perform at that? And if you think about researchers and people who do research, I think that can be kind of a helpful lens on it. I can't believe I'm going to be the person bringing this up, because I hate when people bring this up and I don't have anything good to say about it. But right, every profession right now is just saying, like, what about AI? And like, if I in this conversation, usually you would ask me about it, and I would say what I'll say to you right now, which is like, I don't know. No one knows. This is like changing rapidly, and there's a lot of anxiety about it. And there's lots of strongly worded, opinion pieces about this is going to save us, this is going to destroy us. It's neither going to save us nor destroy us, but here's kind of what we have to do with it. I don't know. I don't. I mean, I guess I'm just going to identify it as a category that there's a lot of thrash around right now, and that's true in PM. That's true in design. I think it's true in software development. Right? You sort of see this kind of everywhere. Um, and research is sort of having its own kind of anxiety party around it. I think a thing that's happened, these are all kind of all tied together for me, but, um, when the sort of the kind of tech workforce became remote, thanks to a pandemic and lockdown, right? Lots of orgs were already partly remote or fully remote, but user research became remote. So there was a time when user research meant, like in your example, you go out to the environment and you see what's happening there, because there's things there that you wouldn't see. But when workforces became remote and research became remote, good and bad things happen, right? Like, we can actually get a lot of people to sit. We can get 7 people to watch a customer conversation. I couldn't have brought those 7 people out in a car with me to Ames, Iowa, to go to like a distribution center and interview for a day. That's just expensive, geographically prohibitive. And so, we've kind of gone to this point where research, the default is it takes place over Teams or Zoom. And I'm hoping that trend starts to reverse a little bit, and then we find, you used the great word balance earlier. I think, can we find a balance between remote research and in-person research? Remote is great because you get this participation from your team. You also can, if you're talking to consumers, you can talk to people in, geographically distributed communities that are sort of harder to get to. It doesn't just have to be people in big cities. You can also, maybe sample for people that you couldn't get otherwise just because of their time, access to them. So there's possibilities for better representation and better inclusion and participation. So those are great, right? We needed that in research. On the other hand, it feels like, well, I don't have to tell everyone the difference between meeting with somebody in person, seeing their environment, seeing what's beyond the camera, and doing something, on a screen like you and I are doing now. Of course, they're different. We're well aware of how they're different. I'd like to see more balance. I'd like to see maybe more studies that are 60-40, 40-60, half and half, so that we don't lose track of that. Because the thing that is, in addition to the data that we don't get when we don't go out there, this sort of, what's behind the camera, what's on the floor, what's in the break room, what else is going on. There's also a thing that happens to us, our whole team, that we don't get out of our environments. And research is not meant to be safe. It's meant to be challenging and a little uncomfortable and a little provocative, so that you can reorient your view of the world. And so there's nothing like, to get extreme about it, like getting on a plane, going to another city, getting in a rental car, using the GPS to navigate to some place you haven't been, knocking on going into an office or knocking on a door. Like, that's all dislocating for us. And, we haven't even done the interview yet. And I think that dislocating that chance to be sort of excited and challenged and energized by a thing about the world that we don't know is one thing that makes this work so powerful, in that thing we were talking about before, right? Changing how we understand things in a way that's not attributable. So I miss having that experience. I miss that happening to me, because I get a lot of energy out of it, and it drives me to be able to tell new stories about what's happening or what could be happening. So I guess this is just my plea, or maybe my hope I'll kind of announce here. Like, can we find more balance between the in-person and the remote, so that we can really just tap into all the value that this work has to offer?
Yeah, it's definitely harder to be more empathetic to users, because you don't know where they working from and how they do this day to day. So it may be challenging. Before, you could go and see that and spend a couple days there and things like that. Yeah. And I did have a question about AI, by the way.
Okay.
But you kind of answered that as well. I was just interested in general, if you have any ideas, or maybe you've tried yourself, or maybe you know what's coming on the market to help user researchers do their jobs, or maybe some, I don't know, tools and agents or anything.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like every few weeks somebody posts an article where they took some latest generation of tool and tried it, and kind of reporting on what it's good for and what it's not. And I kind of make note of those as they fly by, and then
Mhm.
so I don't know what a new tool is. I feel like by the time we hang up from this video call, whatever tool we would talk about would be out of date. It just seems like it's changing really, really rapidly.
Yeah, everybody, it's moving so fast. People like writing all these articles or sharing ideas, and they being forgotten already. Yeah.
I guess I do have one thought here, is that we've been talking sort of about techniques and so on at a fairly high level. Um, But doing research, like doing any sort of project scope task, has many, many, many subtasks.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we do use AI in research now because all the transcriptions that come from interviews are generated by AI, and I think it's that old. It's that old. This is like from the maybe even the '70s, right? Once we figure out how to do something, we don't call it AI anymore, right? Transcription is a thing that make people roll their eyes at, but not that long ago, it was completely not a possible technology. And so we have that and we use it. Um, but just think about any task. Like if you're going to do a research study, you're going to um, you know you're going to have a calendar. You're going to have goals. You're going to have internal interviews. You're going to have memos. You're going to have like tools and artifacts. You're going to have scheduling. You're going to if you're doing B2C, you're probably going to pay research participants incentives. You're going to have recordings. You're going to have summaries, transcriptions, edited videos, PowerPoint decks. There and even producing all those things has many, many subtasks. And so, I think like I get kind of anxious or overwhelmed when I think, oh, something's going to do research for me. But that's not the case. So when I see people trying things, I think they're trying things like, um, here's some rough text. Can you write an executive summary for me? Like there are many, many, many kind of subtasks that are in any kind of knowledge work. And so maybe this is not a prediction, but just I'm musing aloud. Like maybe we're going to see like transcription, some of those sort of knowledge worker tools come into our desktop, if you will, in ways that are not going to reinvent user research, but are going to kind of chip away at some of the manual parts of it. Again, I haven't played with this, so I'm not one of these people that's taking a 10,000 entry spreadsheet and coding it with this and that. So I don't know. Those people are pushing the margins by trying this stuff, but we might just see some more banal improvements in how our work happens with some of these kinds of tools. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. Everything changes so fast, so many tools. Everybody's trying to put something into their product, so we'll see. All right, so we're almost coming to an end here. And lastly, I just wanted to ask you if you have any advice for organizations, for product leaders, for product managers, just something in general for user research, or maybe motivate them, or maybe something we haven't covered yet.
Yeah, I think I mean, a lot of my advice often comes down to like knowing yourself. Like, this is if you want to be a better interviewer, it's good to know yourself and be able to hear your own biases and hear what makes yourself uncomfortable. If we talk about, trying to improve your practice or improve the maturity of how you're doing user research, I think that's not a thing where, here's the three things I'm going to say that you should work on. Like, I think it's an, up for a team or a leader to kind of know themselves and think about, yeah, what's your priority? I think, boiling the ocean is overwhelming, and you tend to not get anything done. And there might be some low hanging fruit that is going to really, move the needle, kind of make a difference. Some basics like, right, we talked about finding participants. That if you have to reinvent how to find participants every time, I think that is just so labor intensive. So figuring out that process from a compliance point of view, from a data management point of view, who are your vendors? Do you need vendors? All that stuff. Figuring it out and documenting it and sharing it is going to be painful at first, but kind of save time, save effort, make you more efficient. It doesn't change the quality of your research. It just changes kind of the uphill battle of it. Um, I think organizations sometimes struggle because they can't see what research has happened before. So if someone has a question, it's like, who do I talk to ask? Well, they left. Well, I don't know, so I think sometimes trying to understand what is the need, what do we need to look at, and how do we kind of put that someplace and let people know that it's there. I think that specifics really vary. Um, I think sometimes there is a basic skill gap as well, and that's often who I work with is like people that want to up level their interviewing skills, their question asking skills. So yeah, what's something that you could identify that would move the needle that's like specific that you could kind of put some effort into implementing that and giving it some time and seeing, are we better at that? Are we more efficient, or are our skills better? So that you can make some progress in something that you think is important.
Thank you very much for your time today. It's been a great conversation, a lot of useful information from you. Thank you very
Great.
much.
It's really nice to speak with you. Thanks for a good chat.